Hello everyone. In this video I want to talk a little bit about the notion of corporate entrepreneurship. So when we tend to think about entrepreneurship, we tend to think about entrepreneurship happening in new startup businesses, in businesses that don't currently exist. But in fact a lot of entrepreneurial activity occurs in businesses that are already going concerns, in businesses that already exist and operate. So when we think about entrepreneurship, it's very important that we understand the notion of corporate entrepreneurship. So corporate entrepreneurship is entrepreneurial activity that happens within an existing business. So say you're Myer, for example, and you want to extend your retail business by offering a new form of retail experience. You might engage in an internal process of corporate entrepreneurship to start up a new part of your organisation. Similarly, a company like Google does this all the time. Google has its own internal corporate venturing process where they're constantly starting off new businesses to provide new product solutions for customers. So corporate entrepreneurship is quite extensive, and in fact there's probably more entrepreneurial activity happening within existing businesses than there is happening in the startup community. So businesses large and small are regularly engaging in this entrepreneurial process. And in the book, they sort of make a distinction between sort of two areas in which corporate entrepreneurship happens. The first is what's called corporate venturing. So corporate venturing is when we start a new business venture. It's very important to remember that many organisations have multiple business units. So for example, if you look at a company like Mitsubishi, which we tend to associate with the car industry, they actually have a number of different business units. So they make cars. They also have a division that makes escalators and lifts. They make electrical appliances. So each of those represents business units. And so any existing organisation can engage in a process of corporate venturing when they come up with a new idea and start a new business within their existing corporate level business strategy to try and take advantage of a market opportunity. The other part of corporate entrepreneurship is what's called strategic entrepreneurship. So strategic entrepreneurship tries to marry up the ideas of strategic management, which is all about market position, competitive advantage, and entrepreneurship, where you're trying to create new value and open up new markets. So strategic entrepreneurship is an approach that an organisation might have to extending its market base and opening up new market opportunities to achieve competitive advantage. And sometimes when we talk about corporate entrepreneurship, we talk about this notion of intrapreneurship. So the term corporate entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship tends to get used interchangeably. So intrapreneurship is where we have individuals or group who work in association with an existing organisation to create either a new organisation or to investigate ways to renew or innovate within that existing organisation. So entrepreneurs are trying to change the organisation from within, are trying to adapt and evolve the organisation in some way that enables it to take advantage of future strategic opportunities. And so one of the things you need to understand then if you're going to engage in corporate entrepreneurship is whether you are a manager, an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. Okay, so a manager tends to be someone who wants to work within an existing traditional business and to manage that existing business pretty much in an unchanged state, so trying to effect a continuation of that existing business model. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, tend to want to have complete freedom. They don't want to be hamstrung by anything that's happened in the past. They want to be self-reliant, self-motivated, and managed by their own goals and objectives. An intrapreneur tries to strike a balance between the two. What an intrapreneur does is take the focus of an entrepreneur around this desire for change, but also then do it by making use of the resources and capabilities of an existing business. Okay, so an intrapreneur is sort of a mid-range solution. And it's really important, again, when you're looking at yourself and you're thinking about your approach to business and whether you, what type of business you want to be in, that you understand whether you yourself are classified as a manager, an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. And we need to understand, if we're going to drive corporate entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship within our business, we need to ask ourselves, is our company truly organised to be entrepreneurial? So there's questions we need to find answers to before we're able to know whether we are a truly entrepreneurial company. For example, is it easy for people to get the blessing of the company to do things? Is the company willing to invest in people, in change? Is it willing to provide ways for innovation to happen? So is it creating space for people in their jobs to actually take on innovation as a driver of change within the organisation? So again, when we look at our organisation, we need to think about things like our structure, our culture, the operating context in which we compete, and how that might actually impact upon our ability to act in an entrepreneurial way or to engage in that process of corporate entrepreneurship. Now, corporate entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship is not easy. Okay, there are often barriers within an organisation, and as someone who's engaged in a process of entrepreneurship, you need to know a little bit about how you can overcome those barriers. So what are the barriers? One of the most obvious ones is resistance to change. When an organisation has been operating for an extended period of time, what we tend to see is that people become locked into doing things in a particular way. They see the world through particular lenses. And so as a result, they don't want to engage in the change process. Remember too that wherever you change, you're actually changing the existing or dominant power structures within the organisation, and that can come as a threat to some people working within that business. So there's often a lot of resistance to the change process. There's often a lot of bureaucracy that really slows down any project approval process. So while people might have some really good ideas that they want to drive through the organisation, the bureaucratic nature of the organisation prevents them from engaging in an entrepreneurial process. There may also be a refusal within the organisation to allocate resources to where they're actually needed. So we have this great new idea, this potential chance to develop and grow the organisation, but there's often a refusal or benign neglect associated with ensuring that that proposal has sufficient resources to actually grow and develop. There's often a lack of training and support for employees within the organisation to ensure that they have the skills necessary to be able to grow and develop the organisation. So if you're not investing in people, if people are not able to develop their skill base, how are they then going to be able to go on and innovate within the organisation? There's often tends to be low reward for success. So even if we have a successful idea, what we tend to find is that success is not valued by people within the organisation, which tends to demotivate people's willingness to engage in entrepreneurial activity. And if we're going to support entrepreneurship, we need to have certain key things that are present within the organisation. So for example, we have to have the right culture or vision or atmosphere within the organisation where we support entrepreneurial activity, where people feel like if I engage in a process of entrepreneurship, that will be valued by my peers and valued by the organisation, and that will generate some positive return for me as an individual. You've also got to have a very strong orientation to the market. When we're in business, we really need to understand what the customer is wanting, what are the drivers of customer behaviour, and how can we better target those customers to attract them to our organisation. So entrepreneurial organisations tend to have good market sensing, good ability to understand the customer and integrate customer data into their decision making. Again, to be entrepreneurial, we tend to have an organisation that's very small, very flat and very dynamic. As organisations become larger and more bureaucratic, it becomes really difficult for those organisations to function effectively. Often what we see when a company wants to set up an entrepreneurial activity, they'll set up what's called a skunk works, which is a new separate part of the business that's dedicated to actually coming up with an idea and generating that idea, but it'll be a very small dynamic organisation. Again, to be good at entrepreneurship, we often see that there will be multiple approaches to entrepreneurship within the organisation. So many different perspectives, many different ideas we welcomed in the entrepreneurial process. And also the organisation will have a process of interactive learning, where it's constantly learning from the process of engaging in entrepreneurial activities. So if these things are present, then we're more likely to be successful with our entrepreneurial strategy. So what do we mean by an entrepreneurial strategy? When we're talking about an entrepreneurial strategy, we're talking about a strategy that is vision directed, so it has a clear vision and purpose. We know where we want to go, and we're focused on achieving that with a set of strategic actions. It's a strategy that has organisational-wide reliance on entrepreneurial behaviour, so it rewards and encourages people to act entrepreneurially within the bounds of an existing organisation. An entrepreneurial strategy seeks to purposefully and continually rejuvenate the organisation. So again, we need to have a culture where change is appreciated, where change is valued, and where people are constantly willing to engage in the change process. We know that entrepreneurial strategy needs to shape the scope of the operations. So the entrepreneurial approach we'll take will shape how we respond to market opportunities as they emerge. And we'll also know that with an entrepreneurial strategy, we're trying to support the recognition and exploitation of entrepreneurial opportunities. So again, we set up reward systems within the organisation that allow people to identify opportunities and to take advantage of those opportunities. So in the book they talk about the 5 steps or 5 stages that are involved in developing an intrapreneurship or corporate entrepreneurship strategy. And so basically this involves developing the vision, encouraging innovation, structuring an entrepreneurial climate or culture, developing individual managers, and developing venture teams. And I've said this a few times throughout this unit, that entrepreneurship is actually quite often a team-based sport that involves many people across the organisation. So what I'd encourage you to do is to read the section at the end of chapter 8, which deals with the stages in the intrapreneurial strategy, and think about some of the issues that are associated with corporate entrepreneurship.